Welcome the anointed ones. Never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. Just pass them the pen and let them sign their downfall. They thought they had you cornered. They whispered, they schemed. They thought they were slick, plotting in group chats like you weren't 3 moves ahead with receipts, timestamps, and an alibi so clean it could do your taxes. But here's the cold, brutal fact. 80% of betrayal comes from people who smile in your face and clap when you're not looking. And the other 20%, they're just mad you saw through the fog and didn't invite them to the throne room. See, most people respond with outrage. You responded with strategy. You let them build the stage, then pulled the floor out on opening night. All that fake love, you archived it. All that envy, you studied it. Then flipped the playbook and served it back so poetic Shakespeare would have shed a thug tear. So buckle in, because this isn't about petty revenge. This is chess in a burning room. You didn't just survive their plot, you made it your promo trailer. Number 1, you didn't flinch, because real ones calculate chaos, they don't react to it. You didn't flinch, because real ones calculate chaos, they don't react to it. When you saw that envy creeping in, you didn't throw a tantrum or make a scene. You paused, you observed, you stayed silent. Not because you were afraid, but because you were scanning the field. Most people get loud when they feel attacked. You got surgical. You slowed down time in your head, analyzed the energy shift, and watched how every fake smile twitched just a little too late. They expected you to panic. They expected a wild response, some loud confrontation they could twist into their narrative. But you were too seasoned for that. You knew how emotional reactions give away power. And you don't play those games. You studied the temperature of the room, noted every offbeat move, and let them think they were in control. That's what made the strike so clean when it came. No theatrics, just precision. The truth is, chaos is loud, messy, and distracting, but only for those who never learned how to stand still in the middle of it. You saw the mess for what it really was. A blueprint. Every jab they threw, every weird vibe, every shady move. It wasn't random, it was data. And you collected it without them even noticing. That's the advantage of staying calm. It makes you invisible to those who are too loud to notice their own exposure. You were never just surviving their drama. You were mapping it. While they were busy trying to shake you, you were getting sharper, more aware, more dangerous. And when the time came to respond, you didn't just react. You delivered something they couldn't even trace back to you because it was too clean, too controlled, too evolved. That's what happens when someone doesn't just face chaos, they calculate it. And that's exactly why they never saw it coming. Number 2, they thought they were whispering behind your back. You were documenting the echo. They thought they were whispering behind your back. You were documenting the echo. They really believed they were being slick. Quiet conversations, sneaky shade, the kind of energy people think they can hide behind fake laughs and vague posts. But what they didn't realize is that nothing truly stays hidden from someone who's been forced to develop instinct. You weren't just guessing. You were catching patterns, collecting slip-ups, and connecting dots in real time. You let them talk, let them scheme, let them believe they were getting away with it. But you were 5 steps ahead, saving receipts like trophies. People like that always underestimate the ones who listen more than they speak. They think quiet equals clueless. What they didn't factor in is that you've seen this before. You've dealt with envy dressed up as friendship. You've dealt with the laughs that stop when you leave the room. So instead of confronting them right away, you did something smarter. You let it build. You let them show you their full hand while they assumed you were still figuring out the game. And it wasn't just what they said, it was how they said it. How their tone changed when others were around. How their support came with backhanded compliments. You watched it all. You didn't need to guess motives when the patterns were loud enough to chart. You didn't need to expose them because the truth was already revealing itself through their own behavior. You knew if you waited long enough, they'd dig their own hole proudly with your name in their mouth. That's the part they'll never understand. You didn't strike out of nowhere. You simply let the echo get loud enough for everyone else to hear. Because when people talk behind your back, they forget you still have ears, and sometimes a better memory than they do. So when you moved, it looked effortless. But every step had context. Every silence had a purpose. You didn't just hear the whispers. You made sure they left a trail. Number 3, you didn't match their energy, you redirected it like a black hole. You didn't match their energy, you redirected it like a black hole. When they came at you with negativity, you didn't swing back or stoop to their level. You took all of it, the envy, the attitude, the shade, and you absorbed it without flinching. Not because you were weak, but because you understood something they never will. Power isn't always loud. Real power is knowing you don't have to respond to every shot fired. Sometimes the best move is no move until the timing is perfect. They wanted a reaction. They wanted you off balance, angry, defensive. That was their goal. That's how they win, by dragging people into their emotional mess. But you didn't play into it. You took all that energy, all that noise, and fed it into your focus. You used it as fuel. While they were busy obsessing over you, you were leveling up in silence. They never expected you to use their hate as motivation. That's what caught them off guard. They were trying to distract you, but they ended up energizing you. You moved smart, not fast. You studied the room while they scrambled for attention. You redirected the energy like a force of nature, one they couldn't explain or stop. Everything they threw your way ended up working in your favor. Their gossip only made you more unshakable. Their doubt pushed you to refine your craft. Every attempt to tear you down just made you more precise. That's what it means to redirect energy. You don't give them the satisfaction of knowing they got to you. You flip the script so completely they start wondering if they ever mattered at all. And by the time they realized what happened, it was too late. You weren't even in the same space anymore, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. You didn't match their mess. You upgraded from it. While they were busy being loud and petty, you turned their fire into fuel and walked away untouchable. Number 4, they mistook your silence for cluelessness, but you were building an arsenal, not alibis. They mistook your silence for cluelessness, but you were building an arsenal, not alibis. While they plotted, you prepared. There's a difference between being quiet and being dormant. They thought you were in the dark just because you weren't speaking up. To them, silence meant weakness, confusion, maybe even fear. But what they didn't realize is that some of the most dangerous moves are made quietly. You weren't sitting still because you didn't know what was happening. You were sitting still because you did. You saw through the shade, read between the lines, and recognized exactly what kind of game they were playing. But instead of confronting them when they expected it, you did something they never planned for. You started collecting power. While they were plotting behind the scenes, you were upgrading your mindset, your strategy, your position. You weren't defending yourself with excuses or running around trying to fix narratives. You were sharpening your skills, fortifying your boundaries, and preparing for a moment they couldn't predict. That's the thing about people who assume silence means submission. They forget that real strategy doesn't announce itself. You weren't trying to look strong. You were becoming stronger. You didn't need to defend your name in every conversation or react to every passive-aggressive jab. You were letting them talk, letting them slip up, letting them show their cards while you refined your next move. Every insult, every fake smile, every underhanded comment, they were adding fuel to something much bigger than revenge. You weren't building excuses, you were building proof, building growth, building leverage. They had no idea that your silence wasn't stillness, it was structure. They underestimated the storm because you didn't broadcast the thunder. They didn't see the preparation, the planning, the patience. But when the moment came, it all unfolded like it was scripted. Your silence didn't mean you were behind. It meant you were calculating every step, waiting for the exact time to strike. Not for attention, but for impact. They brought noise, you brought results. And by the time they realized you were never clueless, only calculating, it was too late to pivot. You weren't dormant. You were dangerous. Quietly, strategically, fully. You made them think they were ahead, then rewrote the script with them as extras. The trap was so elegant, they volunteered to walk into it. They thought they had the upper hand. That smirk, that fake confidence. They truly believed they were outsmarting you. They mistook your calm for being one step behind, not realizing you were the one holding the pen the whole time. You gave them just enough space to feel like they were winning. Let them throw shade, talk slick, move shady, all while thinking you were none the wiser. What they didn't realize is you had already done the math, played out the outcomes, and positioned every piece exactly where you needed it. You let them play the role of the main character in a script they didn't even know you wrote. That's how clean your strategy was. While they were performing for attention, you were directing the whole production. You weren't reacting, you were setting the stage. Every silence, every subtle move, every act of restraint was part of a bigger picture they never had the range to see. They didn't walk into a trap because they were stupid. They walked in because you let them believe they were smart. You used their ego against them. You made their pride work in your favor. And by the time they looked up to celebrate their win, the curtain had already closed on them. You flipped the narrative so smooth they didn't even realize when the roles changed. What they thought was control was actually a setup. What they thought was victory was your bait. You weren't trying to prove anything. You were just waiting for the right moment to remind them who the real author of the story was. And when you flipped that final page, they were no longer in power. They were just background noise in your plot twist. The beauty of it all, you didn't even need to gloat. The elegance was in the execution. They handed you the win while thinking it was theirs. That's not just revenge, that's mastery. Number 5, you made them think they were ahead, then rewrote the script with them as extras. You made them think they were ahead, then rewrote the script with them as extras. The trap was so elegant, they volunteered to walk into it. That's the genius they never saw coming. You didn't need to out-yell, outpost, or outshine. You let them have the spotlight, the moment, the illusion of control. You let them talk, plot, and underestimate. Because you knew the long game, and you played it with surgical patience. While they were convinced they were in the lead, you were already behind the scenes rewriting the entire narrative, not with ego, with precision. They thought they had the main role. They didn't realize the plot wasn't about them. You didn't fight their ego, you used it. Let them feel superior. Let them think they had the upper hand. It was all part of the design. Because sometimes the most powerful strategy isn't confrontation, it's redirection. You let them build their illusion, even help them along the way. And just when they thought they had the win in their grip, you flipped the entire script. And that's the part that really stung. It wasn't a loss by force. It was a fall by their own hands. The trap wasn't brutal, it was beautiful, seamless, too smooth to notice. You made it look effortless, not because it was easy, but because you had already studied every move before the first scene began. Their downfall wasn't sabotage, it was self-inflicted, curated by their arrogance and directed by your awareness. You never needed to prove you were smarter. You just let the story unfold and gave them just enough rope to write their own ending. By the time the truth hit, you were already in your next chapter, unbothered and ahead. That's the art of playing the underestimated role until it's time to reveal you were the author all along. Number 6, your vision was too high frequency. They choked on the altitude. Your vision was too high frequency. They choked on the altitude. You saw it coming because you operate in a bandwidth they can't tune into. You weren't being dramatic, you weren't overthinking. You were simply seeing what they couldn't. And that made you a threat before you even opened your mouth. The truth is, some people are so grounded in petty energy that they can't comprehend someone who moves with purpose, pattern, and precision. They're stuck in loops. You're working in layers. They were trying to play checkers on a board you already folded and left behind. You didn't just sense the envy, you understood its source. While they were looking at surface-level wins, you were reading the undercurrents. They thought they could hide jealousy under smiles and sarcasm, but your intuition doesn't need proof to know. It just knows. That's why you were always 10 steps ahead. You were picking up signals they didn't even realize they were broadcasting. And when you didn't respond how they expected, they got frustrated. Because people who can't match your frequency always assume you're being difficult. But you weren't being difficult. You were being deliberate. You stopped explaining your moves because you realized they weren't wired to understand them anyway. You weren't confusing, they were unqualified to decode you. It wasn't arrogance, it was clarity. They were suffocating on the same air you were thriving in, not because you're better, but because you chose altitude over attention. You elevated, you evolved, and you didn't ask for applause, you just moved. That's what made it so threatening. You didn't need their validation. You outgrew their understanding. They didn't fall back because you changed. They fell back because they couldn't breathe where you were headed. You were speaking vision, they were stuck in volume. You were calculating purpose, they were chasing performance. And when they tried to play you, they couldn't even read the rules. Because the game wasn't designed for their level. You didn't lose them, you left them behind. Quietly, unapologetically, because altitude isn't for everyone, and you were never built to stay on the ground. Number 7. You mastered the art of strategic invisibility. You mastered the art of strategic invisibility. Disappearing isn't weakness, it's battlefield camouflage. You weren't gone, you were ghosting the noise to focus on the mission. People assumed you were quiet because you had nothing to say. Truth is, you had too much on your mind to waste it on empty rooms. You stepped back not to avoid the battle, but to study it from the shadows. That's what threw them off. They couldn't track you, couldn't predict you, couldn't label you. You became unreadable on purpose. See, loud players get targeted, visible threats get neutralized. You learned that early. So while everyone else was busy performing, you were perfecting. You removed yourself from pointless circles and made silence your shield. While they chased visibility, you built value. Every time they thought you vanished, you were actually repositioning, reshaping, reloading. You weren't hiding. You were evolving in private. The most dangerous people aren't the loudest in the room. They're the ones you forget to watch. You understood this. You made peace with not being seen so you could reappear when it mattered most. Sharper, stronger, and 10 steps ahead. They were watching for noise, but you moved like strategy. And when you returned, it wasn't for attention. It was for impact. That's the thing about strategic invisibility. It's not about fear. It's about control. You decide when to be seen, you decide when to speak, you decide when to strike. They thought your silence was surrender, but it was simply you choosing not to waste ammo on a target that hadn't earned the shot. You were never absent. You were just above the nonsense. Let them think you disappeared. Let them think you faded. Because when you show up again, you don't walk in asking for a seat. You take the whole table, not because they remembered you, but because you never stopped working while they were watching. And that's what they'll never understand. Presence is power, but controlled absence is warfare. Number 8, they wanted clout, you wanted consequence. They wanted clout, you wanted consequence. That's why your revenge wasn't loud, it was legacy. They were chasing moments, you were building something that would outlive the noise. While they were busy performing, posting and begging for reactions, you were crafting outcomes that didn't need an audience. That's the difference between people who want to be seen and people who want to shift the room. They came for your name, you came for the entire narrative. They thought throwing shade on your name would make them relevant. They didn't realize they were lighting the fuse on something far bigger than a petty feud. You weren't clapping back, you were constructing. You weren't looking for followers, you were laying bricks, one move at a time, for a structure they could never enter. They wanted screenshots. You wanted results. And results echo louder than any temporary hype. You didn't need to tell your side of the story because your work told it for you. Your wins did the talking. Your growth exposed the envy. Your silence made them louder, and that made them sloppy. That's what happens when someone's focused on appearances while the other person is building permanence. Their validation was external. Yours was rooted. They needed applause. You needed time. And when your moment came, it didn't explode. It expanded, quietly, powerfully, without announcement. Your revenge wasn't dragging them down. It was rising so far above them they couldn't even explain what happened. They wanted attention. You became an example, and that hit harder than any response ever could. You didn't just outgrow them, you made them irrelevant by becoming unforgettable. Your focus was never on proving them wrong. It was on becoming so right, so solid, so undeniable, that history would speak for you. They chased clout to feel important for a day. You chose consequence, so your presence would echo for years. That's not revenge, that's evolution, that's legacy. Number 9, you didn't clap back. You rerouted their karma with GPS precision. You didn't clap back. You rerouted their karma with GPS precision. They wanted a reaction. You gave them a result. They were expecting drama, a meltdown, a petty back and forth they could screen record and twist into victimhood. But you didn't give them any of that. You didn't take the bait because you saw the trap. They were trying to trigger chaos so you'd look like the problem, but you played it differently. You let their energy fold in on itself. Instead of stooping to their level, you redirected the flow. You didn't yell, you didn't post, you didn't rant. You just moved different, smarter, colder, sharper. They came for your attention. You gave them silence and strategy, and that silence, it had weight. It messed with them. They thought you were ignoring them. You weren't. You were watching everything and choosing not to respond in ways they could predict or control. You let life do the heavy lifting. You knew that every move they made out of spite was another seed planted, for their downfall, not yours. You didn't need revenge. You let their behavior loop back to them in a package they wrapped themselves. You set the coordinates, and karma showed up at their door wearing their own bad intentions. That's the thing. They were chasing attention. You were engineering outcomes. You turned their petty attacks into momentum. You flipped every insult into elevation. While they were busy making noise, you were making changes. And by the time they realized you weren't clapping back, you were winning. They had to watch you shine with nothing left to say. Your success wasn't just the flex. It was the consequence, the response they never saw coming because they were too focused on the moment while you were planning the aftermath. That's the power of not reacting. You give karma room to be punctual and precise. They wanted a war, you gave them a mirror. And what's better than getting even, making them irrelevant, quietly, completely, with no need for applause, just undeniable results. Number 10, they studied your moves. You studied their intentions. They studied your moves. You studied their intentions. Skill is visible. Motive hides in shadows. You hunted the latter. They watched everything you did like it was a blueprint, mimicking your words, your style, your rhythm, thinking that if they copied the exterior, they'd somehow capture the core. But what they didn't realize is you weren't operating off tricks or trends. You were moving with intention. And while they were obsessed with what you were doing, you were laser-focused on why they were watching so hard in the first place. That's the real game, knowing the why behind someone's smile, their compliments, their sudden support. Because envy rarely walks in loud, it walks in friendly. And you knew that. You weren't fooled by who was clapping. You were paying attention to who paused before they did. While they were studying your technique, you were decoding their motive, their energy, their need to keep tabs. It wasn't admiration, it was measurement. They weren't inspired, they were threatened. But you didn't panic, you didn't push them out. You let them think they had access. You let them linger, observe, collect. And while they were busy shadowing your steps, you were tracking their pattern, their inconsistencies, the moments where their words didn't line up with their energy. You weren't chasing their respect. You were analyzing their strategy. And once you saw through it, it was game over, because skill is easy to copy, but intention, that's invisible unless you know where to look. And you were trained to look beneath the surface. You weren't intimidated by people watching your moves. You were studying what made them watch in the first place. Was it curiosity, insecurity, competition? You clocked all of it. So when it came time to move, you didn't just block them. You outclassed them. They were chasing your steps, but you had already mapped their motivation and burned the route behind you. They were playing checklists. You were reading souls. That's not paranoia, that's precision. And that's why they never saw your next move. Because while they were watching your hands, you were watching their hearts. Number 11, you outplayed them with one weapon they never acquired, self-discipline. You outplayed them with one weapon they never acquired, self-discipline. Envy is loud, mastery is silent. One unravels, the other outlasts. They moved off impulse. You moved with intention. That was the gap they could never close. While they let emotions run their mouth and ego run their moves, you practiced something they couldn't fake, control. You didn't need to react to everything said about you. You didn't need to defend yourself in every room. You understood something they didn't. Power doesn't panic. They were so desperate to be seen, to be heard, to be right, they exposed themselves every time. Loud jabs, messy drama, reckless plays. That wasn't strategy. That was insecurity with a microphone. But you didn't feed it. You didn't match the noise. You trained yourself to rise above it, even when you had every reason to fire back. That's not weakness. That's war-level patience. Self-discipline made you unpredictable. While they assumed you'd respond like they would, explosively, emotionally, you stayed grounded, and that made you dangerous. You didn't need to clap back because you were too focused on building things they couldn't dismantle. You didn't need to announce your every move because your consistency made the noise for you. They mistook your restraint for softness. That's how little they understood power. You weren't holding back because you couldn't strike, you were holding back because you didn't need to. You didn't come to prove a point, you came to become the point, and you did it without theatrics. While their envy ate at them from the inside out, you were mastering the things that actually matter: timing, focus, endurance. You built in silence, evolved in silence, executed in silence, and by the time they realized they couldn't shake you, they were already behind. Envy crumbles under pressure. Mastery is pressure. That's why they'll burn out and you'll keep showing up. Not because you're louder, but because you're rooted. Self-discipline doesn't just outplay chaos, it outlasts it every single time. Number 12, they were driven by resentment. You were fueled by premonition. They were driven by resentment. You were fueled by premonition. You weren't paranoid, you were prepared. That's why they fell into your foresight. They thought you were just being cautious, maybe even overly sensitive, but you weren't reacting to what was happening, you were sensing what was about to. While they let bitterness push them into reckless moves, you stayed grounded in clarity. You didn't guess, you knew. Not because you heard a rumor, but because your intuition picked up on shifts before anyone else noticed. You didn't need proof to prepare. You saw the cracks in their energy before the fallout even began. Resentment made them sloppy. Premonition made you surgical. They moved off past disappointments, trying to hurt you from a place of their own damage. But you were already 5 steps ahead, not out of fear, but because your gut never lies. You felt their envy creep in long before their words turned cold. You sensed the shift in their tone, the forced laughs, the growing tension they thought they were hiding. But you didn't panic. You planned. While they acted from emotion, you moved with precision. They lashed out without a strategy. You stayed still and studied. That's what made the difference. You didn't take the bait. You watched them spiral into exactly what you expected. That's not luck. That's vision. Premonition isn't some mystical thing. It's pattern recognition born from survival. And you've had to survive more than they know. So when the moment came, you weren't surprised. You weren't shocked. You were ready. You already knew where they would go, what they would try, and how far they'd reach. Because people driven by resentment are predictable. Their hatred writes their script, and you read it like a map. You didn't retaliate. You didn't warn them. You let them fall right into the foresight you quietly held. Because when you're built from wisdom and not wounds, you don't move emotionally, you move exactly when it's time. And that's why they lost the game they thought they were playing alone. While they were fueled by spite, you were moved by instinct, and instinct always wins. Number 13, you didn't need revenge. You became the storm they swore would never come. You didn't need revenge. You became the storm they swore would never come. You didn't return the energy. You absorbed it and evolved past them. They expected you to break, to crack under the pressure, lash out, or get bitter like them. They thought their sabotage, silence, and shade would derail you. But you did the opposite of what they were hoping for. You grew. You didn't mirror their moves, you metabolized them. Every insult, every fake smile, every blocked door, you turned it into fuel, quietly, efficiently, strategically. While they were trying to distract you, you were transforming, not out of spite, but out of necessity. You knew responding would just make you look like them, and you weren't trying to match their level. You were building a new one entirely. They played emotional games, hoping to trigger a reaction. You gave them elevation instead. They were looking for a scene. You gave them a legacy. That's the part they'll never recover from. Not that you fought back, but that you didn't have to. You evolved beyond the environment they tried to trap you in. You let them keep their energy. You didn't match their chaos because you were too busy becoming something they couldn't even recognize anymore. You didn't show up with vengeance. You showed up with transformation. You became everything they said you wouldn't, and then more. Not to prove a point, but because that's what happens when you choose growth over games. They tried to write you off, but you rewrote the ending. And now they're stuck watching the very version of you they never believed could exist. The storm wasn't an outburst, it was your arrival. Collected, focused, evolved. They never saw it coming because they were too busy underestimating the silence, misreading your calm, and ignoring your resilience. You didn't need to clap back, expose receipts, or seek validation. You just became undeniable, and that's the storm. Not destruction, ascension. The kind that drowns everything fake and leaves only what's real standing. You didn't become their karma, you became their reminder. Number 14, they thought you were checkers. You were 4D chess, quantum level. They thought you were checkers. You were 4D chess, quantum level. They plotted in straight lines. You curved the board. While they moved predictably, one step, then the next, you were playing several games at once in dimensions they couldn't even perceive. They were stuck in linear thinking, focused on immediate gains and petty wins, while you were orchestrating a reality that twisted and bent beyond their comprehension. Their strategy was simple, flat and visible. Yours was layered, complex and invisible until it was too late. They underestimated the depth of your mind. They thought if they controlled the obvious moves, they controlled the game. But you weren't just reacting to what was in front of you. You were rewriting the rules, creating new pathways, and folding the board to your advantage. You played on a plane where their pieces were irrelevant, their tactics obsolete. While they planned in black and white, you operated in infinite shades of possibility. They saw obstacles, you saw opportunities, hidden, disguised, waiting to be exploited. They tried to trap you with predictable patterns. You dissolved those patterns before they even formed. Their linear plots were no match for your multidimensional vision. They mistook your silence for simplicity. Little did they know, every quiet move was a calculated step on a complex map only you held. You didn't just see the next move, you saw the move after that and the one after that, weaving futures they couldn't yet imagine. That's why they stumbled into traps they didn't even realize were set. Your mastery wasn't in reacting faster, it was in thinking deeper. While they stayed on the surface, you sank into the depths where the real power plays happen. They tried to play you on their board, but you didn't just change the game, you changed the dimension of the game. In a world of checkers, you were quantum chess. They tried to catch you in straight lines, but you curved the entire board around them. And when they finally realized it, the game was already over, before it even began. In the end, being the chosen one in a world crowded with envy and shallow games isn't about noise or spectacle. It's about something far deeper. It's about seeing what others refuse to see, moving where others are stuck, and building when others are breaking. While they chased clout, you chased consequence. While they fueled resentment, you operated on premonition and precision. The battlefield they expected was loud, chaotic, and reactive, but you brought a different kind of power, silent, strategic, and unshakable. You mastered invisibility, not as a retreat, but as a weapon. You let their envy bounce off your calm, absorbing the energy not to be consumed, but to be transformed into growth. Their moves were predictable because they were driven by emotion. Yours were unstoppable because they were grounded in discipline and foresight. You didn't just play their game, you curved the board, operating on levels they couldn't even perceive, rewriting the rules quietly, confidently, and irrevocably. Your legacy isn't built on petty revenge or fleeting applause. It's constructed with deliberate intent and lasting impact. The storms they feared weren't moments of outburst. They were your ascension. You didn't need to clap back or explain yourself because your results spoke louder than any words ever could. You became the silent force that outlasts the noise, the calm within the chaos, and the invisible hand guiding the future while they remained trapped in the past. To be the chosen one isn't to be understood by everyone, it's to move beyond the need for understanding altogether. It's to stand firm in your vision, knowing that those who envy will always chase shadows while you keep creating light. It's to embrace the discipline that outlasts envy, the wisdom that anticipates moves before they're made, and the strength to evolve beyond the petty battles into a realm where only mastery lives. So, let them watch, let them plot, let them misunderstand, because you've already won the only game that matters, the one where patience, vision, and silent mastery rewrite destinies. You didn't just serve them their own game, you invented a whole new level of play, and that is what makes you truly unstoppable. If this hit differently and you're ready to rise above the noise, don't just watch, be part of the movement. Subscribe now to join a community that's all about mastering the game, not playing it blindly. Hit that like button to show you're here for more real talk and raw truth. Drop a comment below, share your story, your grind, your breakthrough, because this isn't just a channel, it's a tribe. And if you know someone stuck in the chaos, share this with them. Let's build something unshakable together. Your next level starts here, don't miss it.